If Kiev was the starting point of the collapse, Stalingrad was a spiritual purgatory. In late 1942, Khrushchev was once again sent to the Eastern Front as a political commissar. This time, he was with Zhukov, facing the elite German army, the Paulus Group. Khrushchev's task was ostensibly political work, but in reality it was to stabilize the front line, supervise the command, and prevent anyone from retreating. You heard it right. Khrushchev was the supervisor at the front, carrying out the most cold-blooded orders. Whoever retreated without authorization was shot on the spot. He personally signed special orders, and even once, when the troops retreated beyond the command line, he decisively called the Ministry of Internal Affairs to intercept them, and dozens of soldiers were directly executed. Many people said he was cruel, but he himself said, "If I am not cruel, those Germans will be more cruel." He was not afraid to die. He was forced by the war to iron face. After the end of the Second World War, Khrushchev became a political commissar with a war record. But this experience did not make him become more loyal, but rather sowed a deep dissatisfaction with Stalin's system. He recalled countless times at night that, had it not been for the political repression, the battle for Kiev would have been a success. If it were not for the political pressure, the Battle of Kiev would have saved hundreds of thousands of people. If it hadn't been for the never retreat order, the victory at Stalingrad would have been much less costly. If it had not been for the bureaucracy, many generals at the front would not have been accidentally killed. What Khrushchev did not say was that the war was not just a bloodbath for the outside world, but also a purgatory within the system. That is why, after Stalin's death, he was the first to propose de-Stalinization. He wanted the future of war to be decided not by gods but by men. Khrushchev is not Zhukov, not the kind of military arrangements can be a hammer of the god of war. He is not Khufu, will not be alone to defend the city against the enemy. But in a war that consumed tens of millions of lives, his role was unique. He was a high-ranking member of the party but chose to go deep into the front line. He had no military rank but could decide life and death. He saw the cruelty of war but did not allow himself to be cold-blooded to the end. And it is these real, complex, with a bit of anger side shape that later dared to criticize Stalin in the Soviet Communist Party Congress, dared to play with the United States Missile Crisis, dared to take on the system, Khrushchev. Years later, the Cuban Missile Crisis was in fact an extension of Khrushchev's World War II shadow. Some people think he is weak, but in fact this is a real understanding of war in the critical moment of calm rescue. He knew the limits of mankind, but also knew which step is really cannot cross the red line. In October 1962, the world's heartbeat almost stopped. American reconnaissance planes photographed the Soviet Union deploying missiles in Cuba. Kennedy and Khrushchev looked at each other across the Atlantic Ocean. The world was just one fuse away from nuclear war. For 13 days, the Earth seemed to hang on the edge of the nuclear button. And the man who pushed the world to the border of doom, Khrushchev, finally became the most afraid of war. On the surface, Khrushchev looks like a Cold War fanatic. Recklessly deployed missiles on the doorstep of the United States, threatening to break the nuclear balance. But the truth is, he never wanted to do it in the first place. The crisis was more like a game of chance. The Soviet Union, in order to counteract the deployment of American missiles in Turkey, also needs to find a bargaining chip in Cuba. The United States cannot show weakness, but also do not dare to ignite the powder keg. Both sides are pressing each other, but both are afraid that a madman who pushes the wrong button will wipe out the Earth. According to later US-Soviet bilateral records recall, in the most tense moments, Khrushchev lost sleep every night, pacing the room with a telegram, repeatedly asking, will they make the first move? After the crisis passed, Khrushchev whispered the truth for the first time at a Politburo meeting. If it really comes to a fight, and the whole world is lost, who can win? This was not a wimp, this was sobriety. He began to make private contacts with the United States, pushing for limited cooperation. He proposed a nuclear test ban treaty. He emphasized that peaceful coexistence was the future of the world. Some say that at that moment, Khrushchev changed from an aggressive hardliner to a cautious realist. Years after the crisis ended, declassified CIA documents revealed Khrushchev was clearly a man who tried to gain a negotiating position by forceful posturing. But our internal judgment was that he did not intend to actually start a war. It's like two drunks facing off in a bar, each with a dagger out, shouting, "Come on," but actually thinking, "Don't make the first move." The Cold War was like this. Everyone was afraid of war, but no one dared to show weakness. And Khrushchev was the first to say, "We can't play with fire." Khrushchev made a world-saving decision during the crisis: to withdraw his missiles in exchange for not invading Cuba and acquiescing to the covert withdrawal of Turkish missiles from the United States. It was a diplomatic triumph that was negotiated offstage, but he has been criticized at home. Some said he was humiliated and weak. Some say he's not tough enough. Some even thought he had betrayed the socialist camp. The man who saved the world has become the country's point of shame. But he himself knows, "I didn't win, but I saved mankind." After the Cuban Missile Crisis, Khrushchev's tone at the United Nations began to lower. He no longer frantically proclaimed that we will surpass the United States, but talked more about the peace race, coexistence framework, nuclear, coexistence framework, nuclear, and peace. Instead, he talked more about peace race, coexistence framework, nuclear limitation. In 1963, the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union signed the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which was the result of Khrushchev's efforts. He once said, "The world is too small to allow us to go on fighting forever." This was his real transformation from fire player to firefighter. He was the least like the Soviet hierarchy but the most like the people. The Soviet Union's top brass were mostly scholarly, calm, serious, and collected. Khrushchev, however, was rude, loved jokes, spoke in the vernacular, and tapped the table. He never read from a script, but said, "Comrades, I'm going to be honest." He was more like a workshop uncle than an office elitist. Because of this, he had a natural affinity with the workers and farmers. And he really listened to them. Once when someone complained about the unfair distribution of food, he called the minister directly and said, "Find out what's going on for me, or you won't eat either." Khrushchev once told a foreign press conference, "I'm not a czar, and I'm not some kind of god. I am an ordinary man." A statement that was actually very rare in the Soviet context at the time. He was one of the few Soviet leaders who openly admitted that leaders make mistakes, which was at odds with the later climate of sanctifying leaders. Sometimes he was asked, "Why are you so rude?" He replied, "I'm a peasant, I don't know any fancy official language, but I speak the truth." This explains why he became increasingly isolated within the party. The Soviet Union was never a system that favored truthfulness, preferring silence, discipline, and sophistication. From time to time, he was able to demonstrate a certain coarse but humorous philosophy of life. In 1957, Khrushchev visited Poland. There was a dove release ceremony. Just after the release, a pigeon shat directly on his shoulder. The media went crazy, and the Western media teased, "The dove of peace also has a problem with his policies." It was a joke, but his reaction at the time was quite calm. "It wished me good luck." Then why did he come to power? It wasn't luck, it was a breath of life. After Stalin's death, there was a power vacuum at the top of the Soviet Union. All factions fought each other to a standstill, and in the end, the one who won was not the most senior or the smartest, but the one who dared to charge the most, Khrushchev. He secretly united the military, mobilized support, cleverly balanced the factions, and succeeded in bringing down the head of the secret police Beria and shot. In this dangerous moment, he did not gamble on luck, but relied on his own intuition and ruthlessness of more than 20 years in the political arena.